The man who planned Pearl Harbor told his own government it would destroy Japan before it happened. In writing, they ignored him. He carried out the attack anyway, and then spent the rest of the war watching every single word of his warning come true, exactly as he said it would, while the empire he served collapsed around him. This is not a story about Pearl Harbor. You think you know that story. This is the story underneath it. The story of the most important military warning in the entire Second World War, given by the man who understood the enemy better than anyone on either side, ignored by the government he served, and proven correct in the most devastating way imaginable. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto did not want to attack America. He designed the attack. He commanded the attack. And he knew, before the first bomb fell on Pearl Harbor, that it would eventually cost Japan everything. Here is what he saw. Here is what they refused to hear. And here is why ignoring one man's warning changed the entire course of the war.
Level 1. The Empire that didn't know America. By 1941, the Japanese Empire was at a crossroads. It had been expanding aggressively across Asia for over a decade. China, Korea, Manchuria, Southeast Asia, a string of military conquests that had made Japan the dominant military power in the Pacific. But expansion required resources: oil, steel, rubber. The raw materials that kept Japan's war machine running were not available in sufficient quantities within the empire itself. And the one country that stood between Japan and those resources was the United States. American sanctions, American diplomatic pressure, an American oil embargo that threatened to grind the Japanese military machine to a halt within months if nothing changed. The Japanese military leadership had a choice: negotiate, accept American conditions, scale back expansion, potentially abandon territory already seized at enormous cost, or fight. And among the men who would have to decide, the generals and admirals who crowded the conference rooms and argued late into the conference rooms over maps of the Pacific, almost none of them had actually been to America. They knew the statistics. They understood the geography. They had studied American military capability in the way you study something you have never touched, on paper, at a distance, without ever feeling the weight of what those numbers actually meant. Isoroku Yamamoto was the exception, and that exception was about to matter more than anything else in the entire war.
Level 2. The Admiral who knew the enemy. Yamamoto had done something almost none of his colleagues had done. He had lived in America. Not visited, not passed through, lived. He studied at Harvard University between 1919 and 1921. He traveled across the country. He visited the oil fields of Texas. He walked through the steel mills of Pennsylvania. He saw the automobile factories of Michigan, the same factories that could be converted to tank and aircraft production almost overnight if war came. He understood something about America that his government had filed away as a statistic, but never truly absorbed. America was not just a military power. It was an industrial civilization of a scale that Japan simply could not match. The population, 130 million. Japan, 73 million. The steel production, America produced more steel in 1 year than Japan had produced in the previous decade. The oil reserves, America was the largest oil-producing nation on Earth. Japan imported 80% of its oil, much of it from America itself. And beneath all of that, the psychology. Yamamoto had watched Americans, had talked with them, had understood something about the American national character that his government was dangerously underestimating. Americans were not afraid of a long war. In fact, Yamamoto believed the right trigger would make Americans want one. He carried all of this knowledge back to Japan, rose through the ranks, became commander-in-chief of the combined fleet, the most powerful position in the Japanese Navy. And when the decision to potentially attack America came before the military leadership, he was the only man in the room who truly understood what that decision meant.
Level 3. The warning. Yamamoto was unambiguous. In meetings, in written communications, in direct conversations with the Prime Minister and senior government officials, he said the same thing every time. I can run wild for 6 months or a year, but after that, I have no expectation of success. Those exact words. He was not being modest. He was not being diplomatic. He was delivering a military assessment based on everything he understood about American industrial capacity, American psychology, and the fundamental mathematics of a war between two economies of dramatically different sizes. Japan could strike fast. Japan could win early. Japan might even be able to negotiate a peace if America's will to fight could be broken quickly enough. But Yamamoto did not believe America's will could be broken. He believed, with complete certainty, that a surprise attack on American territory would produce the opposite effect. It would unite a divided country. It would end the domestic political debate about whether America should enter the war. It would transform American industrial capacity from peacetime production to full wartime output within months. And when that happened, Japan would be fighting an enemy that was getting stronger every single day, while Japan was getting weaker. Stop and think about this moment. The most experienced naval mind in Japan, the man who had actually been to America, who had studied at Harvard, who had seen the steel mills and the oil fields and the automobile factories with his own eyes, standing in a room, telling his government exactly what was going to happen. And here was the question I genuinely want you to think about. If you were a Japanese government official in 1941, and your most respected admiral told you that the attack you were planning would eventually destroy your empire, would you listen? Or would you tell yourself that he was being too cautious, that he didn't understand the full political picture, that the men who wanted to fight knew something he didn't? Because that is exactly what happened. And it is exactly what always happens when powerful institutions ignore.
Level 4. The attack he didn't want. Yamamoto was overruled. The decision was made. Japan would attack. And here is where this story becomes something genuinely dark. Because Yamamoto, having failed to stop the attack, did not resign, did not refuse, did not find a way to distance himself from a decision he believed was catastrophic. He designed it. If Japan was going to attack Pearl Harbor, Yamamoto was going to make sure the attack was executed with maximum effectiveness. He planned the operation in meticulous detail, the simultaneous strike from multiple carrier groups, the specific sequencing of torpedo and bomb attacks, the timing designed to catch the American fleet at maximum vulnerability. The attack on December 7th, 1941 was, from a purely technical military standpoint, one of the most precisely executed naval air operations in history. 2,403 Americans killed, 8 battleships damaged or destroyed, hundreds of aircraft destroyed on the ground. And Yamamoto, watching the results come in, felt no triumph because he knew what was coming next. He reportedly said, shortly after Pearl Harbor, "I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." Whether those exact words are historically documented or not, the sentiment is beyond dispute. He had told them this would happen, and now it was happening, exactly as he said.
The war unfolded precisely along the lines Yamamoto had predicted. Japan ran wild for exactly as long as he said it would. 6 months of victories, stunning, shocking, rapid conquests across the Pacific. The Philippines, Wake Island, Guam, Singapore, Burma, the Dutch East Indies. For 6 months, Japan seemed unstoppable. And then, June 1942, the Battle of Midway. 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, a core of the fleet that had attacked Pearl Harbor, sunk in a single day. American industrial production had by this point shifted to full wartime output. Aircraft factories running around the clock. Shipyards launching vessels faster than Japan could sink them. Training programs turning civilian pilots into combat aviators at a rate Japan simply could not match. The sleeping giant was not just awake. It was working 3 shifts. Yamamoto spent the next year fighting a defensive war, watching the predictions he had made in those conference rooms come true one by one. Every island, every naval engagement, every aircraft lost that Japan could not fully replace. On April 18, 1943, American codebreakers deciphered Yamamoto's flight schedule for an inspection tour of forward bases. 16 P-38 fighters were dispatched on a mission specifically to intercept and kill the architect of Pearl Harbor.